if you are throwing a barbecue, you want this guy at your house because it was great being able to chat with him, his wife, beautiful son running around as well. Steve Bartle, kind enough to hang out with us. Steve, how you doing?
Man, I'm still digesting all the barbecue you provided, Scotty. That was great stuff, man.
See, look, I like a lot of people on our staff. Like they're all great. But if Madison and this isn't a knock on Maddie, if Maddie says it's good barbecue, it's like, okay, I appreciate that. That means a lot. It's very nice of her. But when Steve says it's good barbecue, that carries a little bit because you've been out and about. You're in Big 12 country. You've traveled with teams. You've had some of the best barbecue out there. That one carries a little bit more value to me. So I appreciate that. That means a lot.
Well, I appreciate that as well. I'm not any sort of barbecue connoisseur, but after coming off the three straight days of barbecue in Texas, that stuff you put out over the weekend was pretty good, Scotty.
That was crazy. Right on the heels of that, everybody was talking about how great it was, and then I don't know if you'd find a brisket, that good in Texas. Scotty did a great job, but Steve,
Yeah.
great to have you on. We were just talking about how Morgan Scally, he just signed off social media a couple days ago. I saw, and it's down into the cave. Year one awaits. How exciting is this time in Utah football?
Yeah, I think there is a lot of excitement for the Morgan Scally era to begin. And it's not that it's strictly excitement. I do think there's, concerns, there's worries about how things are going to go. But overall, and interacting with fans and kind of following along over the last few months, there is just an overwhelming amount of excitement for Scally and what this is going to look like. I think every opportunity, he's had in the public facing situations, right? From his introductory press conference back in January to the opportunities we had to speak with him at media availabilities in spring ball to, a couple weeks ago at media days, he's just looked comfortable in the role where it not that it's easy, but just that it's something he's prepared for. And if there's one thing that you can count on with Morgan Scally, it's that he's going to be as prepared as possible. And obviously, with him being a first year head coach, there are going to be things that he's going to learn and experience for the first time. But I think Utah fans have come to know that they can trust Scally to be as prepared as anybody potentially can be.
So, when you look at the roster overall, and and you had mentioned this, and I was talking to some people close to the team at Big 12 Media today. They said don't sleep on this wide receiver core. They're really fired up about that group of receivers that Dampier is going to have to his at his disposal.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought this up this early. I'm actually about to publish a piece on the wide receivers and specifically Braden Pagan. And Scotty, you got to watch him up close all last season. And with Pagan, he is the type of receiver that just sort of he has the potential to kind of change the math for Utah in a way that they just couldn't with the passing game last year. And I think that's, an interesting element to add to, what we've come to know Utah offense to be, where it's a lot of run game, a lot of ground and pound and physicality. And Kyle always talked about the need for receivers to develop. But I think Morgan and the work that they did in the transfer portal of bringing in Braden Pagan, bringing in Kyrie Scholes, and another from Mississippi State and Ricky Johnson, who Devin Dampier raved about, throughout Big 12 media days. Utah's really added to that wide receiver room in a way that they haven't really in the past, and I'm really curious to see it all sort of come together this season. But going back to what we watched in spring ball, they're going to use these receivers and they're going to get the ball to them in a variety of ways. And I think what Dev did last month in bringing down a handful of receivers. He brought Pegan, Scholes, Ricky Johnson, and Larry Simmons. He brought them down to Arizona for a week, paid for flights, paid for, housing, and they spent a week together just to kind of build that chemistry on and off the field. And I think in talking to Dev at Media Days, he said that that was really beneficial for them. And I think they're focused on hitting the ground running once the season gets going, in the passing game.
What is in terms of the running game? Wayshawn's obviously coming off a great year, but I expect him to be. I don't know. I mean, he was the featured guy, but he was not out there all the time. Expect him to really carry a load this year, and he looked primed to do it. What are your thoughts on Wayshawn?
Yeah, he was, with Wayshawn, he was dealing with something minor early on in the season, and Utah was kind of slow playing, his workload over the course of the season, where, come October and getting into November, he really started to hit his stride. He had, a handful of games of consecutive, triple digits, getting to 100 yards, came up just 19 yards short of 1,000. And our colleague Josh Furlong wrote an article this week highlighting, his sort of motivation this year in wanting to get that mark, but still putting the team first. So I think Utah is entering this year with the idea of him being more of that, bell cow and being more of that workhorse and making him the focal point of the run game more so than they did last year. And like I said, he was dealing with something early on, just a nagging little injury that they sort of managed as best they could. And I think with Devin Dampier and Bird Ficklin and just the dual threat ability that they have, their usage in the option attack, I think the run game is still going to be pretty prominent in this offense under McGiven. And for Wayshawn, I think he's really motivated to put together a really strong year. I'm excited to see what it looks like.
Steve Bartle, Ute Insider, KSLSports.com, joining us right here on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. A lot of people always fired up to see an SEC team. Now, Arkansas may not move the meter, but Eric Weddle should, as he will be put his name in the Ring of Honor coming up in that game. It'll be fun to have him and his family back into town. But for all the kids out there, I don't know if they really appreciate just how good of a player Eric Weddle was.
Man, you ain't kidding, Scotty. It's interesting, going back and looking at some of the highlights from over the course of Weddle's career in the NFL and in his time at Utah. He was so dynamic, a two-way threat at Utah and did it all. And, all of the talk, the last couple of years has been about Travis Hunter being a two-way dynamic player. And, rightfully so, right? Travis Hunter was fantastic, but Eric Weddle, doing what he did at Utah all those years ago, playing both ways, being that wildcat QB. I remember watching him. I can't remember the bowl game because it escapes me, but his matchup with Calvin Johnson and Georgia Tech, and that
Emerald
was
City Bowl. It was
City Bowl.
The one
That's
in
what
San
it was.
Francisco. Yeah. Yep.
Yep, that was the one, and that was a matchup that he took a lot of pride, in taking on a receiver like Calvin Johnson. And I don't remember the numbers, but I know that Johnson was pretty limited that game, and just it speaks to Weddle's overall ability that he was willing to take on one of the top receivers in the country that year and held his own. So Weddle is fantastic and a great representative of Utah football. I think that's what the young generation has come to know him as. And, Arkansas, like you said, maybe isn't the draw that maybe a Florida is. There was already a good amount of excitement for the Arkansas game, but now the fact that Eric Weddle, one of the most beloved figures in Utah football history, is going to be inducted into that ring of honor, I think the excitement has definitely ramped up a couple notches.
We had Ron McBride on yesterday. It was an awesome 45 minutes with Coach, and he was in rare form as always, promoting his upcoming concert in the foundation. But we talked about, both BYU and Utah a bit, and he made an interesting comment because I've heard a bunch of people say they're one of the things they have their eye on is the offensive line with a new coach and everything. But he kind of said, man, this offensive line is going to be good, and coming from Mac, who, he's the guy who can talk about offensive line. That was an interesting comment to me. What have you noticed about the offensive line, about Jordan Gross's coaching, and certainly Alex right there with him? But what's your thought on the offensive line going into the season?
Yeah, obviously that is the big question mark for Utah, right? You lose 2 first-round talents in Spencer Fano and Caleb Lomu. You lose also the 3 interior guys in Jaron Kump, to Noah Togiai, and Michael Bokofisi. Those 5 players played a lot of snaps together. That sort of chemistry and understanding and feel of what you're going up against on a snap to snap basis is just something that Utah isn't going to be able to replicate. Um, but the benefit that they have is the fact that a lot of players that Jim Harding has recruited over the years, and have been able to spend multiple years in the program now, um, stuck around with Jordan Gross coming in, and I think that that's significant for Utah. Because these players are familiar with the culture, they're familiar with the expectations. They've been obviously coached up by one of the best in Jim Harding, and now the opportunity to work with Jordan Gross. I think it's one, in talking to a couple players, that they really were excited for, and obviously it's bittersweet, for them, the players, having to say goodbye to Jim Harding, but also just an exciting opportunity to play for an all-time great who played your position, right? And I think that's been something that has been um, really noticeable in our conversations going back to spring ball with the offensive line. Was there was just a lot of excitement about Gross and what he was going to bring to the table. Watching that group over the course of spring, they definitely got better from week 1 to week 5, and it was a combination of the collective bunch, but then also individuals that emerged and really finished camp strong. I've talked about him a couple times now, but Ike Garcia was a player that really came on over those final couple of weeks, and he's a former 4-star talent coming out of Corner Canyon, and he's somebody that, if he continues on the trajectory that he finished spring ball on, I expect him to be, you know, competing down to the wire for that starting job. He looked really good, and I think just the development. So that's got to continue, and I've been impressed with what we've seen. Going back to spring ball, we haven't been able to get our eyes on anybody just yet, but was encouraged with what we saw from the offensive line going back to spring ball.
It really seems like, and you've been at the forefront of the recruiting world and keeping track of the guys that are coming into the University of Utah. It seemed like there was a little bit of a, I don't know, maybe like a culture shock for a moment when Morgan took over the job. And then throughout the summer, Utah just stacked 4-star upon 4-star, like they got on a heater. It seemed like and again, I'm not in that world. I just look on social media and see when kids recruit and who Utah beat out for to get them. And it seems like things have settled in nicely for this crew just based on commitments they've been able to secure during the summer.
Yeah, when you go through a coaching change like Utah did, right? Going from a legend like Kyle Whittingham, who, his name carries a lot of weight, and kids growing up last few years, they know who Kyle Whittingham is. They know Utah football because of Kyle Whittingham. And with the change, even though Morgan Scalley has been here and been on staff, there is still just kind of that sort of recruits maybe taking a step back from Utah just to kind of assess the situation. And I think Morgan really took a smart approach in focusing here locally and really hitting the in-state recruiting really hard. They got on a run. They had a handful of guys commit, from out of state, going into pipeline states like Texas and Arizona, continuing to bring in good players from those states. but Morgan really hit the Utah state line, within the state lines here, really, really hard. And I think that is a smart move, because these are the players that are most familiar with what Utah is going through, obviously. So I think what'll be interesting is Utah is a program that has continued to evaluate and recruit through the season. They love to evaluate senior film, and that's led to some of these late additions, getting into November and December, some of these late commits and signees. A couple guys that come to mind. Bird Ficklin was a guy that committed in December, somebody that they didn't offer until just before his senior year. Daniel Bray was another player that committed in the month of December. So Utah's, now that they've got the bulk of their class in place, they feel good about the class, I'm sure. They love probably the makeup here. I know that that's always been a point of emphasis, is recruiting in state and still mining the pipeline states as well. But then continuing to build momentum, and they know that they have to provide substance to their message by going out this season and getting wins and putting together, a pretty successful season. That's going to carry the message a bit further as we get to the early signing period. But they feel good about where the class is at, and Utah has always been a program that likes to finish strong and finish the season with a couple of commits.
The schedule seems to be one that is set up nicely for a new coach, new offensive line. We've definitely backloaded, but playing a lot of games at home and playing a lot of teams against a lot of teams, you should be more aggressive then. What do you expect in those first 6 games?
Yeah, I think that's going to be really important for Utah, are those first 6 games. And obviously it starts with Idaho September 3rd, but then you've got that matchup against Arkansas. And even though Arkansas, has gone through a significant transition themselves, that is still an SEC program with SEC talent and bodies, and that's going to be a challenge. Utah State coming down to Salt Lake City, those are 3 games that Utah should probably be favored in all 3, very likely, obviously, with Idaho and Utah State. But then that sets them up well going on the road for their first Big 12 matchup at Iowa State. Then they return home for Kansas before going on the road to Boulder. So, those first 6 games, again, I think really set up nicely for Morgan Scalley to work through some things. Obviously, we know the mistake correction from week 1 to week 2, that's where teams usually improve the most. So that's going to be important. But then getting into these other environments, going on the road to Iowa State and to Colorado, those are going to be challenging places. Iowa State going through a significant overhaul as well, with Jimmy Rogers coming in. And that's going to be interesting. The first Big 12 matchup for him, that's going to be a challenge. So it sets up pretty nicely for Utah, especially with those games at home, to kind of build confidence and build momentum. But there's still going to be some pretty unique challenges going on the road, 2 out of those last 3 weeks in that first 6 grouping.
Steve Bartle joining us right here on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. Ute Insider Camp just about ready to begin. If you and I were joking a little bit about this. It would be nice to think that Morgan might open things up a little bit and let the media see some things. But I think once that window starts to close, I don't think it's going to get reopened. I think it's probably going to be business as usual, correct?
Yeah, I would anticipate it's going to be business as usual. And, spring was great. Morgan opened things up for us, and we were up there pretty consistently. I want to say we were up there, man, the majority of practices back in spring. But with fall camp, obviously it's just a different ball game. With the final preparations before the season begins, I would anticipate things just kind of being the same, where we get our media availabilities, maybe a 20-minute viewing session, and that'll be it. But that's sort of my expectation, and that's just the way that college football has turned fall camp into, is kind of limiting the media access. This is the last opportunity for these teams to put in those final preparations, final tweaks and things before they get going with the season kicking off just a few weeks later.
Bartle, how juiced are you for the season to get rolling?
Dude, I'm so ready for it.
I know
like,
you love this off-season
just
stuff, but the season thing.
no, it's I tell people this all the time. It's like you find 1,000 different ways to, say the same thing. Unfortunately, with football, we have things throughout the year that kind of give us new content to talk about and digest, which is nice. But man, ready for this group to get, on the gridiron and to provide us just new football to talk about.
So back to Eric Weddle a little bit. My favorite Weddle moment was I was doing pre, half, and post on the radio broadcast for that '06 year, the last year of Eric Weddle, and it wasn't a particularly good year in terms of win losses. But they're playing at Air Force, and they need to go down. I don't know if they were down, if it was tied, or if they were down 1 or 2, but they needed a field goal to win the game, and it was the last drive. And, we can make whatever jokes you want about the Brett Ratliff era, but, Brett and Tommy Grady, they had some struggles that year. And Kyle Whittingham puts in Eric Weddle in as his Wildcat quarterback, and Eric takes every snap on that drive. And I even think he throws it a couple times, but for the most part, it's just going right, going left. He churns out the yards, gets them in field goal range. Louis Sakota bangs it through, and Utah wins. But it was just like, I'm going to hand this thing over to Eric Weddle, and I'm not going to let any other quarterback touch the ball. Frankly, I'm not going to let anybody else touch the ball. I'm just going to let this guy go and do it. And it's like Eric Weddle put that team on his shoulders, the offense on his shoulders, and took him down and won a game.
Yeah, he is an all-time talent for a reason, and just an all-time player. He did it all, and did it at a really high level. And the fact that, he's now getting into coaching, it just makes all the sense in the world that he would embrace that type of role. He loves the game of football. And, it's interesting. His son, Gage Weddle, is a 2028 prospect, a highly touted, 28 prospect. Utah, BYU has been in the mix previously, and Ohio State, Georgia have been in the mix for him. And, Gage, two-way player, just like his dad, playing quarterback, playing safety. And it's just perfect. Like, that was Eric Weddle doing a little bit of everything. And the fact that legacy potentially can continue with Gage, I think, is the ultimate compliment to Eric Weddle.
Is he a safety at the next level, Gage? Or
I think so. I think that'll be his best position. There are programs that are probably going to give him an opportunity, and you could potentially use him. If like for Utah, using Utah as an example, right? Using Bird Ficklin, right?
Yeah.
You could see Gage sort of mimic that same sort of role. But certainly when you're talking about his long-term projection and where he fits best, not only at college, but at the professional level, because I think Gage has that sort of potential. It's definitely in that defensive secondary at safety.
By the way, Coach, you'll like this. Eric Weddle came on. I was asking about coaching and dealing with parents. He goes, I don't. He goes, I have a zero contact policy with parents.
You just untalk to them.
We won't talk.
I think that's smart. I've known coaches that do that in high school, and you probably get away with it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like, and if there's one guy that could get away with it,
you're trusting the beard. Yeah,
it's like Eric Weddle is like, I don't want to talk to you.
I had it when I went back to school in 2005. I had a class with him. He was in the back of the class, but that's about the only Eric Weddle interaction I've ever had. We were in the same little class in there. That's not a shout out. It's not a honk.
It sure felt like it.
Oh God. Can it get to 2:00 so I can leave you too?
Oh, man. Hey, Steve, you're the best, man. Appreciate it. Thanks for hanging out and putting up with all of our nonsense at the barbecue, and look forward to catching up again soon.
Let's barbecue again, Scotty. Appreciate you guys.
Tell Miles hi and to stop running around so much.
Yeah, right.
I love it,
Good
man.
luck.
That kid was awesome.
See you guys.
There he is. Steve Bartle, right here on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.